So here I am around Proxima b, an Earth-like planet around Proxima Centauri, and from here I can receive signals from Earth that left a bit over 4 years ago. Let's check one of them out.
Capitalism killed one of my best friends. Libertarian capitalism also killed my father and the family of one of my coworkers.
Oh, what did it do? Voluntarily trade with them to death?
There are two ways that a nation can allow products to come into the marketplace: the libertarian, unregulated American way and the regulated capitalism European way.
Oh boy, someone else pretending that America is unregulated, despite the fact that U.S. companies pay more money complying with federal regulation than they make in profits. Also, what about countries that are less regulated than America, including European countries like Switzerland, Estonia, Ireland, the UK, Georgia, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Lithuania, and Denmark? Not to mention other countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. No one who's ever looked at the issue could ever think that his simplistic little claim that America is unregulated and Europe is regulated matches reality in any way.
The theory is that once people notice how deadly something is, they'll stop buying it and the free market will magically correct itself.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Nations that use the regulated European way, however, force manufacturers to prove that products are safe to use before they're made available to purchase.
So, one more time we're ignoring organizations like UL. Even though they've kept consumers safe for well over a century, they have a much better track record than government regulators.
This is called the precautionary principle. It requires manufacturers to prove to government, and thus to society, us, that the new product is safe before it's let into the marketplace.
No, it's called guilty until proven innocent, and it's how greedy, power-hungry tyrants keep control. That and convincing people they're oh so helpless without mommy government there to protect them. What he's talking about is actually the strong precautionary principle, which is widely regarded as fallacious. In fact, it fails a basic consistency check. It would mean not letting an improvement come to market until it has been proven, even if the improvement is life-saving, meaning that, under the strong precautionary principle, you would have to reject the strong precautionary principle. Check Michael Crichton's novel State of Fear for a description. One prominent example, the strong precautionary principle bans nuclear power based on its minimal risks, despite the fact that nuclear power is the only effective means we have of preventing the far more risky global warming. So the ban on nuclear power itself must be prohibited until it's proven based on that same strong precautionary principle. In fact, many people oppose the Large Hadron Collider based on the strong precautionary principle because no one could prove that it wouldn't create a black hole that would swallow up the Earth. Wonderful company you're in there, Hartman.
Here's how this country's libertarian approach to regulation killed my best friends, my father, and the family of one of my coworkers.
So he's gonna do this. He's gonna take a giant crap all over the graves of his friends and family just so he can lie about libertarianism. Do they come any more despicable than that?
Scientists and health experts knew as far back as 100 years ago that asbestos caused a god-awful form of lung cancer called mesothelioma or mesothelioma.
No, they didn't. Stop lying. In fact, mesothelioma wasn't found in asbestos workers until the 1950s. Before that, the only known problems were due to breathing in asbestos fibers, resulting in asbestosis.
But because America does not use the precautionary principle, toxic asbestos was used in our homes, our workplaces, even our schools well into the 1970s.
Lie, 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 lie! The reason they were being used so much is because government building codes required it! According to a report published in the Texas Administrative Law Journal, quote, what neither party brought to the attention of the court in Commonwealth v. Johnson Insulation, apparently because they didn't know it, is that these asbestos-containing products have been installed in compliance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts State Building Code, which specified, approved, and in some types of service required the use of asbestos. Not only at the time the products were installed, some of them decades before, but at the time the case was filed. Johnson Insulation was, in effect, being held liable for having complied with state law and regulation. The vast majority of current asbestos claims result from past efforts on the part of defendants to comply with and or to enable compliance by property owners and building contractors with building codes and engineering standards at the federal, state, and local levels that specified and approved asbestos in code-compliant assemblies. For most of the second half of the 20th century, asbestos was specified, approved, and in some cases required by building codes and engineering standards adopted by municipalities, states, and federal agencies, including the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the U.S. Public Health Service. As an example, the report quotes California's state housing law and building regulations from 1963 requiring quarter-inch asbestos millboard in the kitchens of living units. Compliance with these standards was also required for obtaining the fire insurance necessary for mortgage financing. Until the end of the 20th century, and in some cases beyond, asbestos was specified and approved in code-compliant assemblies in the U.S., Europe, and elsewhere that passed inspections by the authorities having jurisdiction. What the asbestos plaintiff bar now calls safer substitutes, routinely tested from the 1930s forward in both Europe and the United States, did not pass the standard engineering tests required for code compliance. During that same period that asbestos cement pipe was being tested and adopted in the U.S., in the 4 decades between 1930 and 1970, testing, approval, and installation of asbestos cement pipe was progressing in France, Germany, Argentina, Holland, Brazil, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Russia, Hungary, and Sweden, as well as Italy and the UK. Well, so much for Europe being different! Compliance with building laws and other safety regulations that specified asbestos, including those of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and the U.S. Public Health Service, is now construed in asbestos litigation as negligence, and the landmark 1973 Borrell v. Fiberboard decision, the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court in the following year argued that it was the failure to warn that made asbestos-containing materials unreasonably dangerous. Relying on the Restatement Second of Torts in 1964, which asserted in Section 402A that a product was unreasonably dangerous if a reasonable man would not sell the product if he knew the risk involved. Yet no safety authority, including OSHA and USPHS, required warnings on asbestos-containing products or their packages prior to 25 November 1985. We are thus forced to the patently absurd conclusion that the two American regulatory agencies most directly responsible for public health and safety at the federal level specified and approved assemblies before November 1985 that were, by this legal logic, unreasonably dangerous, and that the engineers, physicians, and scientists associated with these agencies could not have been reasonable men and women. And again, we see that his assertion about Europe is just a bald-faced lie. It is worth noting that European building codes, like their American counterparts, specified, approved, and sometimes required the use of asbestos, so it is at least as absurd for state prosecutors in Italy and France to lay criminal charges against the former executives of companies that enabled compliance with the government's own regulations as it is for American asbestos defendants to be held liable for similar compliance in the United States. In 1973 to 74, while asbestos was still approved, specified, and sometimes required by engineering standards and building codes worldwide, the Borrell decisions repudiated more than a century of testing, standards development, and enforcement of administrative law, declaring assemblies developed by accredited due process and tested and approved by federal, state, and local government agencies unreasonably dangerous. How can the manufacture and use of approved assemblies that complied with all relevant law and regulation, and which were demonstrably not defective at the time of the manufacture and or use with respect to the types of services for which they were intended, be construed as negligence? Yeah! How, Hartman?
My friend Terry O'Connor, my friend Rob Witorsky, my dad, all died of mesothelioma.
And let me guess, you're not putting the blame on any of these regulations and building codes. You're just gonna pretend that they didn't exist so you can lie and blame it on libertarians who weren't in power at any point.
But years earlier, at the Motor Wheel Factory, where Terry worked for about a year before going to college, Terry was going through 1 to 3 pairs of asbestos gloves a day, along with his other factory workers. He had to use those gloves to remove burning hot steel wheel parts from a giant press that was 3 stories tall.
As required by regulations and codes, many of them put in place at the insistence of labor unions. How come I have a feeling you're not going to blame them either? By the way, just so everyone knows, I lost my grandfather to asbestosis, so I'm in no way unsympathetic. In fact, that kind of takes away my sense of humor about this. The fact that Hartman could so brazenly lie about this issue and use his dead friends and family members as political fodder just infuriates me no end.
My dad, Carl Hartman, loved books, loved history. After spending 2 years in the Army during World War II, he was hoping to graduate from college.
Oh, he was in the Army! Tell me, are you going to put any of the blame on them? You do realize that 30% of asbestos-related disease diagnoses are U.S. veterans, right? From World War I on to the end of the 20th century, the U.S. military used asbestos in training facilities, shipyards, and airfields. It was used in roofing sealant, shingles, roofing paper, floor tiles, sheeted flooring, siding, insulation, joint compound, adhesives, and heating system insulation. Asbestos fibers were also used in fire retardant materials in aircraft. They didn't begin removing the asbestos until the 1980s. Veterans of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and others throughout that era, are especially prone to asbestosis and mesothelioma, most frequently from the asbestos in motor pools, and military vehicles also had asbestos insulation. So, are you gonna give your wonderful, saintly, beneficent government the blame for his death?
So my dad dropped out of school, kept his day job from 9 to 5 at the camera shop, got a second job at a metal fabricating plant in Grand Rapids, working with molten hot metal from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m.
Guess not.
But today, right now, there are more than 80,000 chemicals in our environment.
Wow! 80,000 chemicals? Oh my god, you mean there's all this stuff around us that's made out of baryonic matter? Oh, wait. That's everything that exists, isn't it? All of the matter we interact with is a chemical. Sorry, he got me worked up there for a second. Wasn't thinking.
But we haven't even begun to test to find out how toxic or deadly they may be, and we're just beginning to look at the GMOs. Europe and Japan use the precautionary principle. They require you prove something safe before you put it in the marketplace.
We've seen how this is an outright lie in the case of Europe. As for Japan, according to a 2005 article from The Guardian, they still hadn't gotten around to restricting any asbestos until 1995. And even then, white asbestos hadn't been restricted until 2004. The full ban wasn't to go into effect until 2008. Thom Hartmann is a liar!
But our country is still one big libertarian experiment. And with exploding autism and cancer rates, we're probably going to find out in the next generation what's here right now that people are going to be looking back on in 30 years and saying, oh yeah, just like asbestos.
Let me guess. It'll be because of those evil vaccines, right? Let's be clear about this. There is no room for any toxic exposure being any cause for any kind of autism. Autism has genetic roots.
We need to seriously reconsider unregulated libertarian capitalism and think about the safety of people, everyday people.
The only thing Hartman's thinking about is his own political ideology, and he doesn't care whose grave he has to crap all over to do it, even that of his own friends and family, even his own father. I hereby nominate Thom Hartmann for worst human being ever. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, why not hit like and subscribe? And to make sure I can keep producing content, support this channel by becoming a patron. And check out all the other great content here, like this video selected especially for you.